Have you ever found yourself just staring at a dense academic page, genuinely struggling to grasp a massive philosophical concept?
Oh, all the time. I mean, we all do it.
Right. Like, think about Kantian ethics with its rigid categorical imperatives, or maybe the mind-bending contradictory realities of quantum mechanics.
Oh, yeah, those are tough ones.
You read the words, you logically decode the sentences, but the actual weight of the idea just, slips right through your fingers. It stays entirely
That
abstract.
stays completely out of reach. And it's an incredibly common cognitive roadblock, really.
Mhm.
I mean, we are built for narrative, not necessarily for pure theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Philosophy usually lives up in the ether. We can process it intellectually, step by step.
Hmm.
We rarely feel it viscerally in our bones, you know?
But imagine just for a second, if you didn't have to solely rely on reading about it.
Okay, I'm with you.
Imagine walking into a darkened theater, sitting down, and seeing those exact, towering, abstract concepts physically enacted right in front of you.
Wow.
Not just talked about, but breathing, moving, and physically colliding on a stage. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore the mind and the method of a truly uncompromising creator, Farid Novin.
A fascinating figure, really.
He definitely is. He's written 12 plays that absolutely shatter normal theatrical conventions, using the stage as a literal laboratory of concepts.
And shattering conventions is really the baseline here. Because to understand Novin, we have to fundamentally dismantle the architecture of what you, or really any theater goer, likely expects a play to be.
Right, the usual expectations.
Exactly. When you purchase a ticket, you're conditioned to expect mimetic representation. You want a relatable protagonist, a rising action, a climax, and a resolution. You expect to observe human beings behaving like human beings.
Yeah, exactly. You just want to get lost in the story. And we're pulling our insights today from a really brilliant source. It's an incredibly insightful essay from the Art Act blog, posted by Farid Novin in April 2026, and it's written by James A. Baldwin.
It's a fantastic piece of analysis.
It really is. Baldwin argues that Novin's 12 plays, which, we should note right away, do not form a traditional sequential cycle. They're actually a sustained, relentless philosophical inquiry.
Yes, very relentless.
He integrates these massive, completely disparate intellectual terrains that you would never expect to see occupying the same artistic space.
The conceptual collisions are just staggering. I mean, the material examines the integration of incredibly dry juridical abstraction, specifically Immanuel Kant's theories of duty and law, and forces them into the harsh, hyper-real context of modern immigration enforcement.
That is such a wild combination.
It is. Try to picture a border checkpoint operating strictly on Kant's categorical imperative,
Rare.
where, context and human suffering are legally irrelevant.
Wow. And he doesn't stop there either. He takes the mathematics of quantum mechanics and reimagines it as an existential metaphor. He digs into the psychological trauma and the lingering, almost genetic residue of the Iranian and Armenian diasporas. And because his ambition is so vast, the elements of his plays have to function completely differently than a standard drama.
Completely different.
Like, characters aren't really people with favorite colors or childhood hobbies. They're embodied philosophical positions. The physical staging is designed as a conceptual diagram. And the dialogue. It isn't just conversation. It functions as a rigorous, logical argument.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think we need a clear way to visualize what Novin is doing.
Oh, wait, let me jump in here. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if a standard play is like a beautifully decorated house where you come in, sit on a comfortable couch, and admire the wallpaper of the narrative,
I love this analogy.
Novin essentially locks the doors, tears down all the drywall, and forces you to stare at the exposed plumbing and electrical wiring. He hands you the raw architectural blueprints and demands that you analyze the load-bearing walls of human existence. I mean, most playwrights use philosophy like a secret ingredient sneaked into a narrative smoothie. But Novin, he just hands you the raw ingredients. He completely strips away the comforting illusion.
What's fascinating here is how our source material suggests we approach this analytically. Baldwin argues that it is crucial to reverse our usual categorizations if we want to understand the mechanics of these plays.
Reverse them how?
Well, we shouldn't view Novin as a dramatist who happens to like philosophy. We must understand him as a philosopher who simply finds the physical theater to be his most effective medium of publication.
Oh, wow. That distinction flips the entire script on how we are supposed to judge his work.
It entirely reorients the critical lens. If he is a philosopher first, his primary unshakable allegiance is to the integrity of the idea itself.
Right.
He's not loyal to dramatic pacing. He did not care about audience comfort. He prioritizes analytical density over the conventional emotional catharsis we usually demand from art.
Which naturally brings us to the biggest challenge of his method. I mean, how exactly do you take a dense, analytical, philosophical argument and translate it into a physical object on a stage?
That is the big question.
The essay introduces Novin's signature theatrical tool for solving this exact problem, which is called the diagnostic image.
The diagnostic image is arguably his most brilliant formal innovation. We can define it as a single physical object, a repeated gesture, or a specific staging constraint that condenses an entire complex philosophical argument into an immediate visual form.
So it's like a visual shortcut.
Exactly. The goal is to transform a massive abstraction into something you can recognize with your own eyes in a fraction of a second.
Well, let's ground this with the specific examples from the source material, because they're incredibly evocative. Empty shoes left abandoned on the stage, a clock that ticks backward, an unlit candle.
Those are powerful images.
They aren't just background props to make the set look pretty. They are literal visual theses.
Let us examine the mechanics of the unlit candle. In a traditional play, an unlit candle is just a sign that the power is out, or the setting is historical.
Yeah.
But for Novin, if a character is delivering a monologue about the radiating warmth of absolute truth while physically clutching a demonstrably cold, unlit wax candle, the image acts as a counterargument.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The physical object is actually debating the spoken word. It visually condenses an argument about human delusion or the absurdity of holding on to faith without material evidence. The image does the heavy lifting of the philosophy.
But the essay points out a massive flaw in Novin's execution here, and it comes down to the fact that he fundamentally mistrusts his own brilliance.
He really does.
He creates these gorgeous, profound diagnostic images, like the unlit candle or the backwards clock representing a society regressing into historical trauma, and then he ruins it.
Yes, by over-explaining.
Exactly. Instead of letting the audience sit in the dark and wrestle with that profound ambiguity, he supplements the image with heavy explanatory dialogue. He forces his characters to talk about what the image means, resolving the tension way too early.
It's a noticeable habit.
I gotta say, reading this part of the material made me genuinely frustrated. Isn't it a bit insulting to an intelligent audience when a creator feels the compulsory need to spell out their own brilliant metaphor?
I can see why you'd feel that way.
It's exactly like a stand-up comedian explaining the mechanics of their punchline right after delivering the joke. It totally deflates the impact. I mean, if you build a great visual metaphor, why not trust us to figure it out?
The frustration is entirely valid, though we should view this not as an insult to the audience's intelligence, but as the visible symptom of an intense internal war within Novin himself.
An internal war.
Remember our reversed categorization. The philosopher's primary driving impulse is to clarify. The philosopher wants to instruct, to ensure that the logical chain of the argument is airtight and perfectly understood by the receiver.
Right, they want to be totally clear.
But the dramatist's primary tool is the exact opposite. The dramatist needs to withhold information to create tension. The dramatist relies on the unsaid, on the space between the words.
Ah, I see.
So language aggressively intervenes where silence would have allowed the audience to truly inhabit the idea. The philosopher in Novin physically wrestles the dramatist for control of the script, and the philosopher usually wins, flattening the theatrical experience.
But when he does manage to quiet that inner philosopher, when he actually trusts his theatrical instincts and lets the silence breathe, the source material suggests the results are absolutely breathtaking.
Truly breathtaking.
If his urge to over-explain ruins some scenes, we need to look at what happens when he successfully enacts dislocation, rather than just lecturing us about it.
The material highlights Novin's profound grasp of displacement psychology as a prime example of this success. In these specific plays, exile is not treated as a sad backstory. It is treated as a fundamental cognitive reconfiguration of how a human being processes reality.
There is a play mentioned called The Tavern of Unfinished Returns, which dives into this highly specific Armenian concept called karo.
Yes, karo.
The essay describes karo not as a fond, bittersweet nostalgia, but as a sustained present-tense ache. Nostalgia is looking backward through a warm filter. Karo is an active, agonizing, physical longing for something that is gone.
It's very visceral pain.
And to demonstrate this, Novin uses a diagnostic image perfectly. Pigeons are released on stage, trained to fly toward a representation of a village that physically does not exist anymore.
Notice the mechanics of that image. It flawlessly encapsulates the paradox of directing living energy toward an irrecoverable void.
It's so sad, but so beautiful.
And crucially, in this instance, Novin trusts the image. He allows the physical release of the pigeons and their confused flight path to resonate with the audience without having a character deliver a monologue explaining what a pigeon represents. The visual argument is structurally complete.
That brings us to what the essay calls the most formally inventive play in his entire body of work, the manuscript of Ismail.
This one is fascinating.
It tackles the mutability and unreliability of human memory. And the way he stages it is brilliant. Instead of just having a character say, "Oh, I don't remember things clearly," Novin places multiple temporal versions of a single character on the stage at the exact same time.
We need to visualize how disorienting this is for the audience. You are watching three different actors playing the protagonist, Ismail, at age 20, age 40, and age 60, simultaneously occupying the same physical space.
That sounds chaotic.
They're not in separate scenes, they are overlapping.
And the essay details a specific scene called the well incident.
Yes. The three Ismails are attempting to narrate a traumatic childhood event centered around a well. The 20-year-old Ismail insists the well was completely dry, and they used it as a hiding place.
Okay, seems straightforward.
But then the 40-year-old angrily interrupts, claiming the well was overflowing and someone nearly drowned.
Oh, wow.
And then the 60-year-old talks over both of them, asserting that there was never a physical well on the property to begin with.
Wait, really? So they are literally fighting for control of their own history?
Precisely the point. The stage transforms from a passive setting into a contested battleground. By having them physically move around the stage, contradicting one another, Novin dramatizes the fluidity of memory with a mechanical precision that a purely written essay could never achieve.
That makes total sense.
The physical bodies on the stage retain the messy contradictions that our brains usually try to smooth over into a neat narrative.
If Ismail shows us how fluid internal memory is, his other major success shows us what happens when abstract theory hits the rigid wall of external reality. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
In The Trench Between Two Fears, Novin uses structural contrast itself as a mode of argument. We follow two characters. There's Sedai, who embodies pure theoretical abstraction, and there's Jamshidi, who is grounded entirely in logistical pragmatism.
To understand the mechanism of this play, we have to look at the tradition of the Lehrstück, or the learning play, pioneered by practitioners like Bertolt Brecht.
Let's define that for a second. What does a learning play actually do?
A learning play is designed to alienate the audience from their emotions. Brecht did not want the audience sitting in the dark, hypnotized by his soothing narrative, weeping for the hero.
He wanted them thinking.
Exactly. He wanted them awake, critical, and analyzing the socioeconomic machinery that produces the conflict. Novin uses this exact alienation effect by clashing Sedai's high-minded rhetoric against Jamshidi's grounded reality.
To put that into a relatable, real-world context, reading about the Sedai and Jamshidi dynamic instantly reminded me of sitting in a tense corporate strategy meeting.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Sedai is the visionary executive standing at the whiteboard drawing utopian 5-year strategic roadmaps about synergistic paradigms. And Jamshidi is the exhausted IT manager sitting at the table, raising their hand to point out that the servers are currently on fire and the Wi-Fi has been down since Tuesday.
That is a highly effective modern translation of the mechanism at work. The opposition between grand ideology and mundane logistics is not merely discussed, it is enacted materially.
Yeah.
You watch the utopian idea physically fail to execute because of a lack of resources. The audience experiences the violent friction of that gap.
And it all culminates in a devastating line from the play that the essay quotes. It acts as the ultimate reality check to the visionary executive. Jamshidi just says, "Structure doesn't taste like rice."
It's so powerful.
It's so simple, but it completely destroys Sedai's argument. You cannot eat a 5-year plan. A hungry person cannot find nourishment in an abstract ideology.
It forces the audience to confront material reality, and this directly connects to Novin's broad formal range.
Yeah.
He moves from memory plays to Lehrstück to surrealist allegory. He doesn't have a stable aesthetic signature because he forces the form to fit the specific philosophical argument.
And he also has this highly disciplined use of absence, right?
Yes. In most philosophically ambitious theater, creators want to show you everything. Novin frequently wields the unseen. He features victims who never appear on stage, silent examiners who judge the characters without speaking, or explicitly absent narrators.
By withholding these elements, he denies the audience any cathartic closure.
Precisely. You don't get the neat, satisfying bow at the end of the 2 hours. You walk out of the theater carrying this productive unease.
Which is the intended function of a laboratory of concepts. However, this maximalist ambition, this obsessive drive to force the theatrical form to perfectly match massive philosophical ideas, eventually hits a structural limit.
It does.
We have to examine what happens when the concepts simply become too heady for the stage to bear.
Right, the breaking point of theater.
Yeah.
Because Baldwin's essay is clear that the exact same qualities that make Novin a genius also generate his most glaring failures. The first major limitation is something Baldwin terms discursive overload.
Discursive overload.
It occurs when the sheer density of the intellectual data exceeds the carrying capacity of the medium. You can see this in syntax of The Artificial Soul, but the prime example in the source material is a play called The Event Horizon Symposium.
I have to admit, my brain started melting a little bit when I read the synopsis for this one.
It's a lot to take in.
Novin attempts to synthesize macroeconomic theory and quantum mechanics on a stage. Specifically, he tries to map the concept of the economic invisible hand, the unseen forces that guide a free market, onto the concept of quantum probabilistic collapse. How do you even begin to stage that without losing everyone in the room?
Mechanically, it is an astonishing overreach. Imagine an actor representing a central bank policymaker.
Okay.
Rather than making a single choice, the actor delivers multiple contradictory policy speeches simultaneously, representing a state of quantum superposition where all economic outcomes exist at once.
Sounds maddening to watch.
It gets worse. To collapse the wave function, the audience is forced to actively participate, perhaps voting or interacting, which then dictates the lighting, the movement of the other actors representing the working class, and the flow of the scene.
Okay, that sounds intellectually fascinating on paper, but as a piece of theater, that sounds exhausting. You aren't a witness to a drama anymore. You've been conscripted into an interdisciplinary graduate seminar.
Precisely. The theatrical illusion shatters under the weight of the data. Baldwin perceptively notes that these specific works would function far more effectively as written, speculative essays.
I can totally see that.
When staged, the multitude of voices and conceptual frameworks just drowns out any recognizable human element.
It's the internal philosopher taking total tyrannical control and forgetting that human beings are sitting in the seats. And that leads to a second, highly critical limitation Baldwin identifies, which centers around the characterization of women in Novin's work.
Across his corpus, female figures frequently operate as structural vehicles for critique rather than as fully realized autonomous subjects. Characters named Fatana, Mina, and Shirin are often deployed strictly to articulate the play's central thesis.
This brings us to a really fascinating but kind of problematic moment in a play called The Mountain Does Not Answer.
Right.
The staging is incredibly minimal, just a throne, a stone, and an empty chair. These objects form a conceptual triad. The conflict is between three figures. There's Khosrow, who embodies the idea of history as an unstoppable necessity.
By Farhad.
Right, Farhad, who argues that suffering is the only real truth. And finally, Shirin, who represents freedom and self-authorship. And in the climax, Shirin demands the right to choose badly. The essay calls this one of the most powerful feminist statements in his entire cycle.
It is an undeniably potent declaration of autonomy. To claim the right to make a mistake is to claim full ownership of one's humanity. However, the source material points out a fatal flaw in the execution. It remains a philosophical declaration, not a dramatized embodied experience.
Let me push back on how successful this actually is then. If Shirin delivers the strongest feminist statement in the plays, demanding the right to choose badly, but she's ultimately just functioning as a mouthpiece for Novin's philosophical agenda, doesn't that actually undermine the feminist message?
This raises an important question.
Because she isn't a real person making a messy human choice, she is just a conceptual pawn that the playwright moves across the board to win an argument against Khosrow and Farhad.
Yes, and you have identified the exact unresolved paradox that Baldwin isolates in the essay. The idea itself is incredibly potent, but because Shirin is structurally deployed as a philosophical position rather than a psychologically complex person, the impact is entirely intellectualized. It is argued, but is not felt.
The philosopher overshadows the playwright again.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the ultimate boundary of Novin's maximalist method. The sheer gravity of his ideas frequently exceeds what a single character can naturally carry without snapping the illusion of life.
It's just too much weight.
Yet even acknowledging these severe constraints, Novin achieves moments of profound synthesis. Consider the character Miam's closing assertion in that same play. The mountain does not answer.
Oh, I love this quote.
It is perhaps the most succinct summary of Novin's worldview. Miam surveys the conceptual wreckage and states, "They are all wrong. They are all real."
They're all wrong. They're all real. That is heavy. So what does this all mean? We have spent this time analyzing a playwright who builds breathtaking visual metaphors only to nervously over-explain them.
Sure.
Who perfectly captures the agonizing reality of displacement but frequently flattens human beings into conceptual megaphones. Who writes plays so incredibly dense they literally break the boundaries of what a theater can hold.
Baldwin's ultimate conclusion in the essay is that this central friction, the constant grinding war between showing and explaining, between the visual image and the spoken argument, between the demands of theater and the demands of philosophy, is not actually a flaw that Novin needs to fix.
It's not.
No. That friction is the defining characteristic of his art.
The struggle is the point.
His plays force us to ask a terrifying question. What does it actually mean to think in a shared physical space? He deliberately challenges the boundaries of both disciplines, leaving it up to the audience to decide if ideas this massive belong on a stage or in a textbook. But he insists relentlessly that pure ideas can be dramatic.
And that brings all of this directly back to you, listening right now. Take a moment to examine how you consume information or entertainment or art. Are you primarily searching for a comforting mimetic narrative?
A safe story.
Yeah, do you just want to watch characters act like regular people so you can experience a safe, predictable catharsis and go to sleep? Or are you willing to sit in the productive unease of raw, unpolished ideas?
That's the real test.
Are you willing to be challenged by a laboratory of concepts, even if the experiment sometimes blows up the laboratory?
Novin's entire body of work demands that we stop treating complex philosophical ideas as mere background decoration for our lives and start wrestling with them as the active, physical forces that shape our reality.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. We spent time exploring the manuscript of Ismail, where a single character's memory violently destabilizes into multiple, competing timelines arguing on a stage.
Right, the three Ismails.
If our own lived experiences and memories naturally contradict each other in that exact same way, how much of what we confidently call our personal identity is actually just an over-explained diagnostic image?
Oh, wow.
Are we just constantly nervously narrating our own lives to avoid sitting in silence with the terrifying ambiguity of who we really are?
A deeply unsettling yet vital question, completely worthy of Novin himself.
Keep exploring those dense concepts wherever you find them and embrace the friction.